Welcome to Your Mythology Book Club. I'm Daniel, and I'm a Greek mythology enthusiast. In this series, we're covering the Iliad. In this episode, which is part 2 of episode 8, we're covering book 15 of the Iliad. If you haven't listened to part 1 of this episode, which covered book 14, go back and listen to that first. Book 15 is a book that's covered by Homer's Trojan Theater website, which is linked in the show notes. This is an interactive battle map placing characters on the map step by step throughout this book. I highly recommend you utilize this on your own read through, as it can be very helpful envisioning all the fast moving action in this book. So book 15 opens with the Trojans retreating clear out of the Greek camp, being chased by the Greeks through the wreckage of the wall and across the spike-filled ditch, only stopping finally once they reach where their chariots are parked in the hands of their lower-ranked men on the far side of the ditch. And this is when Zeus awakens, with Hera still there beside him. Zeus immediately sees everything. He sees Poseidon leading the Greeks. He sees the Trojans being chased out of the camp, and he even sees Hector there at the Scamandos River vomiting blood. And Zeus is not happy at all. I'm kind of surprised Hera stuck around there next to him, because it's obviously toward her that he'll vent his anger first, and he does. Zeus says to Hera, "O thou ill to deal with Hera, verily it is thy crafty wile that has made noble Hector cease from the fight, and has terrified the host. Nay, but yet I know not whether thou mayest not be the first to reap the fruits of thy cruel treason. And I beat thee with stripes. Dost thou not remember when thou wert hung from on high, and from thy feet I suspended 2 anvils, and round thy hands fastened a golden bond that might not be broken? And thou didst hang in the clear air and the clouds, and the gods were wroth in high Olympus, but they could not come round and unloose thee." Zeus is reminding Hera of a time that she put trouble in Heracles' path, and remember, she was always doing that, and Zeus punished her in this especially extravagant way. There are a lot of things about the Iliad that have aged well. Domestic abuse is not among those. Hera is scared, but she stands her ground to him. "Let earth now be witness thereto, and wide heaven above, and that falling water of Styx, the greatest oath, and the most terrible to the blessed gods, and thine own sacred head, and our own bridal bed, whereby never would I forswear myself, that not by my will does earth-shaking Poseidon trouble the Trojans and Hector, and succor them of the other part. Nay, it is his own soul that urgeth and commandeth him. And he had pity on the Achaeans when he beheld them hard pressed by the ships. I would even counsel him also to go even where thou, Lord of the storm cloud, mayest lead him." Good for her. She makes it clear that she hadn't orchestrated this action with Poseidon. Poseidon was doing what he was going to do out of his own desire to protect the Greeks. This was not coordinated between the two, which is true. Zeus now says that if only Hera would just stick with the same plan as him, Poseidon wouldn't dream of opposing them together. But now Zeus wants Hera to go to Olympos and send both Apollo and the messenger goddess Iris to come back to see Zeus here on Mount Ida. What Zeus wants from Iris is for her to tell Poseidon to stop helping the Greeks. And what he wants from Apollo, remember Apollo is one of the pro-Trojan gods, is Zeus wants Apollo to pump up the Trojans now and get them to chase the Greeks back into the camp. But there's more. Zeus is portrayed as the schemer, the god who's not just on one side or the other, like all the rest of the gods, but as the one who's really pulling the strings and making things happen. And what Zeus wants to happen now is this. Once the Greeks get pushed back into their camp once more, routed and demoralized, this is when Patroclus will finally talk Achilles into that plan he had that Nestor gave him the idea of way back in book 11, the plan for Patroclus to come out to the battle dressed as Achilles. And this, Zeus says, will be the final countercharge of the Greeks, which will be unremitting until through the intervention of Athene, the Greeks will finally take Troy. And Zeus's anger will not abate until this is done. He says to Hera he'll be angry and alert, and he won't tolerate any more of this nonsense where you, Hera, and the other gods like Poseidon go around disobeying me. Hera isn't necessarily happy with hearing all this from Zeus, but hearing that he has a plan to ultimately help the Greeks, she has to be satisfied enough with it. She certainly doesn't want to provoke him any further right now. So Hera obeys. She flies right back to Olympus, where she encounters the goddess Themis. Themis is a Titan, so she's of the generation of gods before Zeus and Hera. And Themis is a personification of law and custom, and she is another wife of Zeus. Their children include the Moirai, the three fates. And I don't think it's a coincidence that we're being reminded of Zeus's close connection to the fates right now, right after his speech about the upcoming closing stages of the war. Themis sees Hera coming into Olympus and says, "Wow, Hera, you look frightened. What happened? Let me guess. Zeus, am I right?" Hera doesn't have much to say to Themis, just that Themis should know well for herself how Zeus is, and that Zeus will announce his own plans soon enough. I don't want to announce his plans for him, but I'm sure no one but Zeus will be happy with them. Of course, Hera knows well enough that there are gods who will be happy to see the Trojans on the offensive again. And she's not really seeing the bigger picture here. None of the gods are, which is that Zeus has told her he's moving towards the final push for the Greeks, and that he just needs to orchestrate this move on the part of Patroclus first to satisfy what is fated to happen next. Hera now goes to the main hall of Olympus, and you can kind of tell she's up to something, a little mischief. She's always looking for a way to express her will. Despite being overpowered by Zeus, she's never really outmaneuvered by him. If anything, having him around to complicate things for her has made her more clever, more cunning than she would have been otherwise. I think she would be quite capable of running things on her own, because she also can pull strings and make the gods do what she wants. She's in the main hall now, and we can imagine various gods lounging about, eating ambrosia, whatever that is. Hera assumes that they all already know about her little chastisement from Zeus, or they will soon enough. And she can use that to her advantage to appear weakened and chastised. Once Hera is sure that everyone is listening, she says, seeming almost careless, like she's just voicing her inner monologue, but really she's planting a seed. She's pulling some strings. She says, "We're fools, us gods, who even try to work against Zeus, whether by arguing with him or by using force against him. He's off by himself now on Gargaros, and he cares nothing for our sufferings. And he reminds us all that he's the strongest, so we all just have to accept whatever evil he sends our way. Why, I think there's already a new sorrow on the way for poor Ares." Ares is in the room right now, by the way. "Poor Ares, he doesn't even know it yet, poor thing, that his own son, Ascalaphos, is dead. Dearest of all humans to Ares, his son is dead." Of course, Ares hears this, and he's enraged. He immediately gets up to take action. Hera has succeeded in right away getting a god to disobey Zeus. Ares is all fired up, and all Hera had to do was drop the news that his son died while Ares was here on Olympus, foolishly obeying Zeus's command for the gods to stay out of the war. Ares goes and commands his follower gods, Terror and Rout, to harness the horses. He means to mount his chariot and fly down to the battlefield and get revenge on the Greeks for his son's killing. And he would have gone too, if Athene, of all gods, hadn't jumped up and stopped him. Athene's motives are purely selfish. She doesn't want Zeus coming home all enraged and taking it out on all the rest of them. So Athene tries to calm Ares down by saying, "You're mad, but this will be your ruin. Hera is playing you, and she's just been chastised by Zeus herself. If you go down to the battle now, Zeus will take his anger out on you and on all the rest of us. your son will end up getting avenged. The man who killed him will undoubtedly himself end up being killed. That's just what happens to mortals in war. Athene is worried that pretty soon Zeus will be done with all of this Trojan war business, and when he is, this kind of behavior from Ares is just going to fuel his anger towards all of them. So Athene talks Ares out of joining the war now. She gets him calmed down enough so that he gives up on his plan to avenge his son himself. And I gotta say, for my money, Ares isn't really all that much, to be honest. He's kind of a big letdown all the time. He should be so cool, the god of war. He should be so cool, and he just isn't. Anyway, now, back inside, Hera finally completes the mission that Zeus actually sent her back to Olympus to do, which is to send Apollo and Iris to go see Zeus, who's still on Mount Ida. When Iris reaches Zeus on Mount Ida, he immediately sends her down to Poseidon with the command to cease fighting, and with the veiled threat that, hey, it looks like, Poseidon, you seem to think that you're the equal of Zeus, when all the other gods acknowledge that he's way stronger. This should be enough to make Poseidon back down. Now we follow Iris down to the battlefield, where she relays the message of Zeus to Poseidon. And Poseidon gets into an argument with Iris, saying things to her that he probably wouldn't be willing to say directly to Zeus's face. Out on it, verily now, for as strong as he is, he hath spoken over haughtily. If indeed he, meaning Zeus, will subdue by force against my will, me, that am his equal in honor. For 3 brethren are we, and sons of Cronos, whom Rhea bare, Zeus, and myself, and Hades is the third, the ruler of the folk in the underworld. And in 3 lots are all things divided, and each drew a domain of his own. And to me fell the hoary sea, to be my habitation forever, when we shook the lots. And Hades drew the murky darkness, and Zeus the wide heaven, in clear air and clouds. But the earth and high Olympus are yet common to all. Wherefore no whit will I walk after the will of Zeus, but quietly let him abide, for all his strength, his third portion. And with the might of his hands let him not strive to terrify me withal, as if I were a coward. Better for him were it to threaten with terrible words his daughters and sons, that himself begat, who will perforce listen to whatever he enjoins. Poseidon is recalling to Iris that he and Zeus, along with Hades, are all brothers, and that once they defeated the Titans and gained the rulership of the cosmos, it was only by drawing lots. It was a random drawing that determined which of the 3 realms each of them ended up ruling. Meaning Poseidon could have just as easily ended up on Zeus's throne in heaven, and Zeus could have ended up being the ruler of nothing but the sea. Moreover, since Poseidon does rule the sea, and that the earth and Olympus are common to all, he certainly won't allow himself to be bullied around by Zeus. And finally, since he's not one of Zeus's many children who are bound to obey him no matter what, Poseidon is just going to do what he pleases. Iris asks Poseidon if this is really the message he wants her to convey back to Zeus. That's a smart way of dealing with this. Poseidon seems to just be venting at her. But he needs to remember that she's just the messenger, and whatever Poseidon tells her, she's got to report it back to Zeus word for word. Iris doesn't want to carry such an inflammatory message back to Zeus. Won't you concede a little here? If she goes back and says this to Zeus, she'll be the closest person at hand for Zeus to vent his anger on. And she also reminds Poseidon that the Furies, who are the avenging deities, are likely to side with an older brother, Zeus, in a dispute. So that's another reason for Poseidon to consider changing his stance. Poseidon responds, Goddess Iris, most duly hath thou spoken this word. Yea, an excellent thing is this, when the bearer of a message has a prudent wit. Yet this is a terrible grief that cometh on heart and spirit, whenso any desireth to upbraid with angry words his peer, to whom fate hath assigned an equal share with himself. But verily now will I yield, for all mine anger, but another thing will I tell thee, and make this threat in my heart, that if against my will, and the will of Athene, the driver of the prey, and of Hera, and of Hermes, and of Prince Hephaestus, if Zeus shall spare steep Ilios, nor choose utterly to destroy it, and give great might to the Argives, let him know this, that our wrath will be inappeasable. So Poseidon agrees to take back his angry message to Zeus, saying that we are equals. But Poseidon does want Iris to relay one new angry message, a threat, that if Zeus ends up not destroying Troy as he's promised, there will be bitter enmity between he and Zeus. And this seems to be the consensus that the pro-Greek gods will all come to. This is kind of the message that sort of helped, calm Hera down not long ago. That as hard as it is for the pro-Greek gods to stomach any more Greek losses right now, the consensus develops around the idea that they are willing, so Poseidon and Hera and so forth, are willing to put up with just a little more of Zeus pulling the strings, so long as his promise to destroy Troy really is fulfilled in the end. So they're going to hold him to it. And with that, Poseidon abandons the Greeks and dives back into the sea. Splash! All that leading them forward with the lightning sword business is history. Not even a goodbye to the Greeks. You're on your own now. He just pieces out, swims down to his chariot parked on the seafloor, and he's gone. So now we're back on the top of Mount Ida to hear what Zeus is saying to Apollo. Go now, dear Phoebus, to Hector of the helm of bronze, for lo, already the embracer of the world, the earth shaker, is gone to the bright sea, shunning our utter wrath, aye, and had he not done so, even the others would have heard of our strife, even the gods of the netherworld, they that are with Kronos. But better far is this, both for me and for him, that, despite his wrath, he should yield to my hands. For not without sweat would this strife have been accomplished. But do thou take in thy hands the tasseled aegis, and shake it fiercely, and affright the Achaean heroes. But thou, archer god, let glorious Hector be thy care, and rouse in him great wrath, till even the Achaeans come in their flight to the ships and to the Hellespont. And from that moment will I devise word and deed, wherewithal the Achaeans may take breath again from their toil. So hearing this, he's got his mission. Apollo immediately flies down from Ida to the battlefield, descending like a hawk to find Hector, who's now come around enough that he's no longer gasping and sweating, and he can now recognize his comrades. And Apollo says to Hector, Hector, son of Priam, why dost thou sit fainting apart from the others? Is it perchance that some trouble cometh upon thee? And keep in mind, Hector is still really sick. Hector replies to Apollo, Nay, but who art thou, best of the gods, who inquireth of me face to face? Dost thou not know that by the hindmost row of the ships of the Achaeans, Aias of the loud war cry smote me on the breast with a stone as I was slaying his comrades, and made me cease from mine impetuous might? And verily I deemed that this very day I should pass to the dead, in the house of Hades, when I had gasped my life away. Apollo now says to Hector, Take courage now. So great an ally hath the son of Kronos sent thee out of Ida, to stand by thee and defend thee. Even Phoebus Apollo of the golden sword, me, who of old defended thee, thyself and the steep citadel. But come now, bid thy many charioteers drive their swift steeds against the hollow ships, and I will go before and make smooth all the way for the chariots, and will put to flight the Achaean heroes. So he spake, and breathed great might into the shepherd of the host. And even as when a stalled horse, full fed at the manger, breaks his tether and speedeth at the gallop over the plain exultingly, being wont to bathe in the fair flowing stream, and holds his head on high, and the mane floweth about his shoulders, and he trusteth in his glory, and nimbly his knees bear him to the haunts and pasture of the mares. Even so, Hector lightly moved his feet and knees, urging on his horsemen, when he heard the voice of the god. But as when hounds and country folk pursue a horned stag or a wild goat, that steep rock and shady wood save from them, nor is it their lot to find him, but at their clamor a bearded lion hath shown himself on the way, and lightly turned them all despite their eagerness. Even so the Danaans for a while followed on always in their companies, smiting with swords and double-pointed spears. But when they saw Hector going up and down the ranks of men, they were afraid, and the hearts of all fell to their feet. So Apollo, just with his voice, has fully healed Hector. And he's now going to lead Hector and his men in an immediate counterattack against the Greeks. Just moments before, the Greeks had been pursuing the Trojans, whom they'd chased out of the camp with the help of Poseidon, and all the way to the Scamander River. Now, the hunters are about to become the hunted. Thoas, one of the lesser-known Greek leaders who has been pursuing Hector and the fleeing Trojans, sees Hector back up on his feet now after having been hauled off unconscious on his chariot not long before. In a really great little piece of expository dialogue, Thoas notes to the other Greeks around him, "Alas, and verily a great marvel is this. I behold with mine eyes how he hath again risen, and hath avoided the fates, even Hector. Surely each of us hoped in his heart that he had died beneath the hand of Aias, son of Telamon. But some one of the gods again hath delivered and saved Hector, who verily hath loosed the knees of many of the Danaans, as methinks will befall even now, for not without the will of loud thundering Zeus doth he rise in the front ranks, thus eager for battle. But come, as I declare, let us all obey. Let us bid the throng turn back to the ships. But let us, as many as avow us to be the best of the host, take our stand, if perchance first we may meet him, and hold him off with outstretched spears. And he, methinks, for all his eagerness, will fear at heart to enter into the press of the Danaans." Thoas's plan is to have the regular army of the Greeks return to the ships, presumably to guard them, while the leaders of the Greeks, which he counts himself among, will stay there in the field and face the revived Hector and attempt to keep the Trojans from getting back into the camp right away again. Among those Greek leaders who are now facing Hector in the field while the main army returns to the ships is Teucros, Idomeneus, and Meriones. Oh, and Meges, and of course Thoas, two no-names who are suddenly elevated to the status of leaders now that the Greeks are really struggling. If you're relying on Meges and Thoas to save the ships, it's not looking good. Now the Trojans drave forward in close ranks, and with long strides Hector led them, while in front of him went Phoebus Apollo, his shoulders wrapped in cloud, and still he held the fell aegis, dread, circled with a shaggy fringe and gleaming, that Hephaestus the smith gave to Zeus, to bear for the terror of men. With this in his hands did he lead the host. The Trojans now advance against the Greeks, with Hector at the forefront, taking long strides with confidence. Proceeding before Hector and the Trojans is Apollo, who you can imagine is either being visible to the men on the battlefield, or you could just imagine the effect he's having with that aegis, which is to put confidence into the Trojans and abject terror into the Greeks. The aegis itself is a mysterious object which is never really well described, but here at least we got a couple of its qualities. It's terrible, meaning frightening. It's shaggy fringed, or sometimes translations will use words like tassels. In other words, it's got some confusing dangly parts. And finally, it gleams and is specified to have been made by the smith god Hephaestus. So we can think of it as being made at least in part of shiny metals like gold. The word aegis has come to mean shield or protection, but the original word may have implied something about the thunderstorm or fast movement, the thunderstorm being the primary manifestation of Zeus, the sky god, the god of storms and lightning. And if you see some similarity in the aegis of Zeus, as in the Ark of the Covenant being used in battle in the Old Testament, I do too, but I'm not finding much online comparing the two. Anyway, back to the battle. Now the Argives abode them in close ranks, and shrill the cry arose on both sides, and the arrows leaped from the bowstrings, and many spears from stalwart hands, whereof some stood fast in the flesh of young men swift in flight, but many halfway, ere ever they reached the white flesh, stuck in the ground, longing to glut themselves with flesh. Now, so long as Phoebus Apollo held the aegis unmoved in his hands, so long the darts smote either side amain, and the folk fell. But when he looked to face on the Danaans of the swift steeds, and shook the aegis, and himself shouted mightily, He quelled their heart in their breast, and they forgot their impetuous valor. And as when two wild beasts drive in confusion a herd of kine or a great flock of sheep, in the dark hour of black night, coming swiftly on them when the herdsman is not by, even so were the Achaeans terror-stricken and strengthless, for Apollo sent a panic among them, but still gave great renown to the Trojans and to Hector. Hector now kills Greeks named Arcesilaus and Stichios. Aeneas kills Medon and Iasos. Medon was the half-brother of Oilean Aias. Iasos was an Athenian leader. Polydamas kills Mecestius. Polites kills Echios. And Paris kills Diocos by stabbing him in the back as he tries to flee from the battle. The Trojans stop pursuing the Greeks to loot the bodies of these men they've just killed. And this is just as well for the Greeks, who are fleeing in such a panic that they get caught up in their own spike-filled ditch and struggle to make it inside the only partially standing walls. Hector does not want to stop the Trojan advance with any more of this corpse looting, so he calls out to the Trojans, "Make ye against the ships, and leave the bloody spoils. Whomsoever I shall see apart from the ships on the other side, his death will I there devise. Nor forthwith shall his kinsmen and kinswomen lay him dead on the funeral fire, but dogs shall tear him in front of our citadel." Finally, a leader saying, "Forget the looting even for a moment and fight." They've reached the battered defenses of the Greeks once more. The wall is in tatters, but that ditch full of spikes is still a barrier to slow the Trojan advance and prevent them from getting their chariots into the camp. But not for long. And Hector smote his horses on the shoulder with the lash, and called aloud on the Trojans along the ranks. And they all cried out, and level with his held the steeds that drew their chariots with a marvelous din, and in front of them Phoebus Apollo lightly dashed down with his feet the banks of the deep ditch, and cast them into the midst thereof, making a bridgeway long and wide as is a spear cast, when a man throws to make trial of his strength. Thereby the Trojans poured forward in their battalions, while in their van Apollo held the splendid aegis. And most easily did he cast down the wall of the Achaeans, as when a boy scattered the sand beside the sea, first making sand buildings for his sport in his childishness, and then again in his sport, confounding them with his feet and hands. Even so didst thou, archer Apollo, confound the long toil and labor of the Argives, and among them rose a panic fear. The Trojans cheer and advance, Apollo going on ahead of them, kicking down the banks of the ditch, filling it in with soil to make a causeway for the Trojans to advance across, as easy for the god Apollo to do as for a mortal man to knock down a sandcastle. The Greeks halt their panicky run only once they finally reach the ships, where they gather and pray. That's all they can do now, pray. Nestor holds his hands up and prays aloud, "O Father Zeus, if ever any one of us in wheat-bearing Argos did burn to thee fat thighs of bull or sheep, and prayed that he might return, and thou didst promise an assent thereto, of these things be thou mindful, and avert, Olympian, the pitiless day, nor suffer the Trojans thus to overcome the Achaeans." Hearing Nestor's prayer, Zeus, the god of storms, thunders aloud from the top of looming Mount Ida to show his granting of Nestor's prayer. This is a relief to the Greeks. Now they have reason to believe that they won't be destroyed by the suddenly returning and revitalized Trojans, led by Hector and the gleaming god Apollo carrying the aegis of Zeus. But the Trojans also hear the thunder of Zeus, and they believe it to be a sign that Zeus favors them in destroying the Greeks utterly now. But the Trojans, when they heard the thunder of aegis-bearing Zeus, rushed yet the more eagerly upon the Argives, and were mindful of the joy of battle. And as when a great wave of the sea sweeps over the bulwarks of a ship, the might of the wind constraining it, which chiefly swells the waves, even so did the Trojans with a great cry bound over the walls, and drave their horses on, and at the hindmost row of the ships were fighting hand to hand with double-pointed spears, the Trojans from the chariots, but the Achaeans climbing up aloft from the black ships with long pikes that they had lying in the ships for battle at sea, jointed pikes shod at the head with bronze. The Trojans are now advancing en masse to the ships, fighting from their chariots, which they hadn't gotten into the camp before because the ditch had prevented the chariots from getting into the camp previously. To counter the Trojans from equal footing, the Greeks now clamber up onto the decks of their ships and fight from this higher position using long naval pikes meant for ship-to-ship combat. At this moment, we finally return to Patroclus, who we find back with Eurypylos. You might remember him from the end of Book 11. He's the friend whom Patroclus discovered wounded as he was returning from Nestor's hut back to Achilles. And Patroclus is again tending to his friend's wound. But Patroclus hears and sees the Trojans advancing. He doesn't know how the battle has turned against the Greeks so quickly, but he can't be still anymore. He can't stand aside and do nothing. Even if it means going against Achilles, he's got to do something. Patroclus says to Eurypylos, Eurypylos, no longer at all may I abide with thee here, though great thy need, for verily a great strife has arisen. But thee, let thy squire comfort, while I hasten to Achilles, that I may urge him to join the battle. Who knows, but with God's help I may arouse his spirit with my persuasion. And a good thing is the persuasion of a friend. You'll remember from Book 11 that Nestor had planted the seed of an idea in Patroclus' mind. He is still thinking about that idea, but right now he's thinking about the more obvious solution, which is maybe Achilles himself will just join the battle now. So Patroclus goes off to find Achilles, and he knows where to look, because Achilles is where he's been ever since his falling out with Agamemnon way back in Book 1. Achilles is in his hut, sulking. And this is all we get of Patroclus and Achilles' drama right now. But it's important to note that Patroclus has had enough. He's ready to insist that they do something. And this is another link in that chain of events we've been talking about that will eventually lead to the return of Achilles to battle and ultimately to the conclusion of the Iliad. But for now, we are returning to the action, with the Trojans having stormed back into the Greek camp. The Greeks have formed a line again between the ships. Some are standing in between the ships on the ground, and others up on the ship's deck, fighting the Trojans, who can't seem to advance beyond this point, while the Greeks, for their part, can't seem to thrust the Trojans back. It's another stalemate here at this outer line of ships, leaving the camp's huts inside this wall of ships, still temporarily protected. Hector is coming right at Aias, who is defending the ships. Remember, Aias' ships are at the far left side of the camp, while Achilles' ships are at the far right side. Aias kills a Trojan named Calator, who is rushing toward the ships, carrying a burning piece of wood in an attempt to burn Aias' ship. Calator is speared in the chest, his burning branch falling harmlessly to the ground. But this Calator was Hector's cousin, some kind of cousin, and Hector saw his kinsman's death at Aias' hands. Now, there's regular battle rage, and then there's you killed my friend, brother, cousin rage. Hector is now extra riled up with the you killed my some kind of cousin, some number removed rage, and he's coming to get revenge on Aias right now. Hector calls out to his men, ye Trojans and Lycians and Dardanians that fight hand to hand, slacken not at all from the battle in this strait, but save the son of Clytios, lest the Achaeans spoil him of his harness, now that he hath fallen in the precinct of the ships. Hector wants to recover the body of his cousin Calator to ensure proper burial so his soul can rest, and to prevent the Greeks from stealing his honor by stealing his stuff. Hector throws a spear at Aias but misses, hitting Lycophron instead. This was a man who is from the island of Cythera, and who'd killed someone on his home island. It's not said here whether this was an intentional or accidental killing, but it kind of didn't matter in ancient times. By killing someone, you became ritually impure, and you had to seek purification in foreign lands by exiling yourself. And Aias here, Telamonian Aias, had taken in Lycophron for this purpose, and they'd become close. They were friends. Aias now says to Teucros, "Dear Teucros, lo, our true comrade hath been slain, even the son of Mastor out of Cythera, whom we honored at home in the halls like our own parents. Him hath great-hearted Hector slain. Where now are thy swift shafts of doom, and the bow that Phoebus Apollo gave thee?" Teucros now starts shooting arrows at the Trojans. We have to imagine Teucros is standing up on the deck of one of Aias' ships. This would be the only safe location from which to fire. He hits a Trojan named Cleitos, a friend of Polydamas, who's driving a chariot alone. And Cleitos slumps over, dead, and his chariot continues charging around now aimlessly. Polydamas has to jump into the chariot as it clatters past him to get it under control. He grabs the reins and gets the horses under control, and then he hands it off to another Trojan before rejoining the battle. Next, Teucros takes aim at Hector himself, and this is one of just a handful of times in the Iliad where the narrator specifically states that had things gone the other way, events would have turned out very differently. Then, Teucros aimed another shaft against Hector of the helm of bronze, and would have made cease the battle by the ships of the Achaeans if he had smitten him in his prowess and taken his life away. But he escaped not the wise mind of Zeus, who guarded Hector, but took away the prize from Teucros, son of Telamon, for he brake the well-twisted string on the goodly bow, even as Teucros was aiming at Hector. And his arrow, weighted with bronze, wandered elsewhere, and the bow fell from his hands. So Teucros has had the misfortune of aiming well enough that it's going to be a lethal shot which would have killed Hector, and that would have sent the Trojans into such a panic that the Greeks would have immediately turned the tide of battle. But it just wasn't meant to be, because Zeus is still protecting Hector, and Zeus himself, from afar, snaps Teucros' bowstring as the arrow launches. The shot goes wild, and the bow falls from Teucros' hands, and he recognizes immediately that some god or another has done this to him, because he says to Aias, "Alas, now verily the god breaks altogether the purpose of our battle, in that he hath cast the bow from my hand, and hath broken the newly twisted cord, which I bound on but this morning, that it might sustain the many shafts that should leap from the bow." Aias wants Teucros to just shake it off and keep fighting, just using a different weapon now. And even if the Trojans are going to win, Aias feels, let's just make them work for it. "Yea, friend, but let the bow and the many arrows be, even so, since the god has confounded them, being jealous of the Danaans. But take in thy hands a long spear, and a shield on thy shoulder, and war with the Trojans, and arouse the rest of the host. Verily not without labor for all their victory, let them take the well-timbered ships. Nay, let us be mindful of the delight of battle." Teucros now makes a noble stand next to his half-brother Aias the Great. But seeing that the feared arrows of Teucros are no longer a threat, Hector is elated, and as he so often does, makes an announcement to his fellow Trojans. "Trojans and Lycians and Dardanians that love close fight, play the man, my friends, and be mindful of impetuous valor here by the hollow ships. For I have seen with mine eyes how the artillery of the bravest warrior was harmed by Zeus, and most easily discerned is the aid of Zeus to men, both to whomso he gives the meed of the greater honor, and whom he would minish, and hath no will to aid, as even now he minisheth the strength of the Argives, but us he aideth." Hector is pointing out how Zeus is directly aiding the Trojans, and this brings great fighting spirit to the Trojans. They see that the most powerful god is on their side. Aias now makes his own announcement to the Greeks, reminding them that they're literally fighting for their lives here. If the ships burn, they're trapped in hostile country. Shame on you, Argives. Now is one thing sure, either that we must perish utterly, or be saved, and drive the peril from the ships. Think ye that if Hector of the glancing helm take the ships, ye will come by dry land each to his own country? Hear ye not Hector exhorting all the host? So eager verily is he to burn the ships. Truly he bids not men to the dance, but to battle. And for us, there is no better counsel nor device but to put forth our hands and all our might in close combat. Better it were to risk life or death once for all than to be straitened in the dread stress of battle, thus vainly by the ships, at the hands of worse men than we be. I love that Aias says Hector is not inviting us to a dance, it's a battle. The Greeks are fighting for their very lives here. Hector, Aias, and Polydamas all kill named foes in quick succession. Meges, the Greek, now tries to kill Polydamas, but Apollo intervenes, causing Meges to miss Polydamas, and he hits a Trojan named Chroismos instead. For no good reason, really none at all, Meges starts looting Chroismos' corpse right away. So dumb. Meges gets attacked by a Trojan named Dolops. Serves him right. Fortunately for the dumb Meges, he's wearing a thick piece of armor that protects him. Despite now being a named character, I'll always think of Meges as a no-name. Meges retaliates, striking out with his spear at Dolops' head. He succeeds only in knocking off his opponent's helmet. But now Menelaus is on the scene to help Meges. Menelaus comes up behind Dolops, who doesn't know that he's there, and Menelaus launches his spear, which tears through Dolops' chest, causing him to fall forward on his face. Not having learned his lesson from just moments before, Meges rushes forward to loot this corpse. And so does Menelaus, who, as king of Sparta, probably has plenty of loot already. These guys, and their looting. So dumb. Seeing these two wolves on Dolops' still warm corpse, Hector turns to a kinsman of his, who's nearby. This is Melanippos. And Hector says, Melanippos, are we to be thus slack? Is thy heart not moved at all at sight of thy kinsman slain? Seest thou not how they are busied about the harness of Dolops? Nay, follow on, for no longer may we fight with the Argives from afar, till either we slay them, or they utterly take steep Ilios, and slay her people. With that, Hector and Melanippos now advance. Aias sees this and says to the Greeks around him, O friends, play the man, and take shame in your hearts. Yea, have shame, each of the other's contempt in the strong battle. For of men thus shamefast, more escape than fall. But of men that flee cometh neither glory nor any avail. Zeus himself is firing up the Trojans now, while Menelaus takes it upon himself to suggest to Antilochus, this is the son of Nestor, and he must be a son that Nestor had very late in life because Antilochus is one of the youngest of the Greeks. I think of Antilochus, I kind of like him. I think of Antilochus as being a very responsible young man who's maybe still learning how to control his youthful impulses. Menelaus says to Antilochus, Antilochus, not one of the Achaeans is younger than thou, nor swifter of foot, nor strong as art thou in fight. See now if thou canst leap out and smite some man of the Trojans. So youthful Antilochus steps forward now from the Greek line, spear in hand. The Trojans back away slightly, wary of this brash action. He's strong, he's young, and he's obviously a little crazy. Antilochus casts. The spear hits Melanippos in the chest, and he falls. Antilochus jumps on the dead man, trying to strip the body of its valuable armor, and Hector is not going to stand for this. This young man has foolishly put himself into a very bad position here between the two armies. Hector rushes forward, intending to kill Antilochus outright. But Antilochus isn't as unaware as you might think. He is the son of Nestor, after all. He looks up in time to see Hector coming, and as quickly as he jumped onto that dead body, he runs back to the Greek lines, his youth now giving him a big speed advantage over Hector. The Trojans pelt him with missiles, but none deadly or even all that harmful. He makes it back safely, only turning around to face Hector once he's again among the Greeks, and Hector backs off. Zeus, still watching intently from high above on that craggy peak of Mount Ida known as Gargaros, has his next move planned. Like a chess master playing against a novice, he's mapped it all out in his mind. Now the Trojans, like ravening lions, rushed upon the ships, fulfilling the behests of Zeus, that ever was rousing their great wrath, but softened the temper of the Argives, and took away their glory, while he spurred on the others. For the heart of Zeus was set on giving glory to Hector, the son of Priam, that withal he might cast fierce blazing fire unwearied upon the beaked ships, and so fulfill all the presumptuous prayer of Thetis, wherefore wise, counseling Zeus awaited till his eyes could see the glare of a burning ship. For even from that hour was he to ordain the backward chase of the Trojans from the ships, and to give glory to the Danaans. With this design was he rousing Hector, Priam's son, that himself was right eager against the hollow ships. And he was raging like Ares, the brandisher of the spear, or as when ruinous fire rages on the hills, in the folds of a deep woodland, and foam grew about his mouth, and his eyes shone beneath his dreadful brows. And around the temples of Hector as he fought, his helm shook terribly. For Zeus out of heaven was his ally, and gave him honor and renown, he being but one man against so many. For short of life was he to be, yea, and already Pallas Athene was urging against him the day of his destiny, at the hand of the son of Peleus. And fain he was to break the ranks of men, trying them wheresoever he saw the thickest press and the goodliest harness. Yet not even so might he break them for all his eagerness. Nay, they stood firm, and embattled like a steep rock hard by the sea, a rock that abides the swift paths of the shrill winds and the swelling waves that roar against it. Even so, the Danaans steadfastly abode the Trojans and fled not away. Zeus wants to see fire among the Greek ships. That's the sign Zeus is waiting for, the signal that it's time to move to the next and final phase of the war, the final chasing of the Trojans from the Greek camp and the slow but unrelenting attack upon the city of Troy. Only once Zeus sees fire among the ships will he then allow the Greeks to repulse the Trojans from their camp. And so, to orchestrate this firing of the ships, Zeus now puts even more heroic rage into Hector's heart, like a puppeteer pulling the strings to arrange exactly the drama he has in mind. But Zeus doesn't have to work very hard to get this rage into Hector's heart. Hector, who has been valiantly defending his city, the city that he's supposed to inherit if he lives long enough, and pass on to his son, young Scamandrios, called already by the Trojans Astyanax, the little lord of the city. Hector's heart is always nearly full of rage when he sees these invaders on his shores. Zeus just pours a little more into the cup, and Hector's heart overflows with fury against the Greeks. Hector is looking everywhere for a place he can break through the Greek line. But the Greeks, they're standing firm. They're man-to-man, armored and shields raised, spears and naval pikes glinting in the light of the fire that the Trojans have brought to burn the ships, if only they can get through this final line of Greek defense. Hector manages to kill a Greek named Periphetes, a lowly messenger from Mycenae. And Hector only managed to kill Periphetes because, as the man was backing away, his long shield was hanging from his back, and Periphetes tripped on the rim of his own shield, giving Hector an opportunity to pounce and plant a spear right through him. But even though it was only the one lowly man that Hector had slain, the Greeks saw the rage in Hector's eyes as he did it. That rage of Zeus, and the Greeks were afraid. They saw that divine anger, and they backed away. Not a rout, but the Greeks retreat, still facing Hector, who advances, pushing them back. That fiery rage of Zeus in his eyes. The Greeks now, they can see nothing else. They can think of nothing else but this divine rage that has seemed to have cast a mist over their minds, a mist over the whole battlefield. The Greeks have now retreated within the first line of ships. They make their new stand between the second line of ships and the huts. Nestor implores the Greeks, "O friends, play the man and set shame of other men's contempt in your hearts. Let each also be mindful of children and wives, and of his possessions, and of them that begat him, whether any have parents yet alive, or they be already dead. For their sake do I here beseech you, for the sake of them that are not with us, to stand stoutly, nor turn to flight. Again, we get this idea of shame, the public shame of not fighting to your utmost in the sight of your comrades. But there's nothing the Greeks alone can do. They're affected by this rage of Zeus emanating from Hector. Their sight is blinded to all else, and their hearts are filled with fear. They need divine help. And they get it, just in the nick of time. In response to Nestor's prayer, Athene now intervenes, and she grants the Greeks a power. And from their eyes, Athene lifted the wondrous cloud of mist, and light came mightily upon them from either side, both from the side of the ships and from the quarter of even-balanced war. And they beheld Hector of the loud war cry and his comrades, both them that stood in the rear and were not fighting, and all of them that fought in the battle by the swift ships. Athene has given the Greeks the power to see through that mist, that fiery rage of Zeus emitting from Hector's eyes. A clear light shines down for the Greeks, and they can see everything now. Fear drains from their hearts, and courage takes its place. Aias is up on the decks of the ships, leaping from one to another like a man who, whether for show or his own amusement, has several horses all pulling a carriage, and he's leaping from the back of one horse to another. Aias is leaping from deck to deck while wielding one of those long naval pikes that Green's translation states is 22 cubits long. The cubit is one of those imprecise ancient measurements that shows up now and then. You'll also see the term used in the Bible. And while there's not really a consensus on exactly how long a cubit was, if we go with the average that folks on the internet seem to give it of about 18 inches, then that means that Aias is jumping around up there with a 33-foot-long pike, stabbing down at the Trojans and encouraging on the other Greeks to keep fighting. Zeus is said to push Hector forward. How literally we're to take this, I'm not sure, but certainly both sides are fighting now as if the whole fate of the war depends on it, which it does. Here we are at the ships with torches alight and ready to burn those fragile wooden hulls. It could all be over in minutes. If just one ship is left undefended for just one moment, it'll burn and spread to the whole fleet. Hector fights his way into one of the ships, and he grabs it by the stern, and he won't let go. This ship had belonged to a Greek that you might not have heard much of yet, but it's a symbolically important ship. It's that of Protestilaus, the very first Greek to land his ship here on the Trojan shore, and the first Greek to be killed long before the opening of the Iliad. We're at the center of the camp now. All the other ships landed after this one and were arranged around it. So here, Hector finally is. After 10 years of enduring these invaders on his shores, he's finally got his hands on the source of this plague, and he won't let himself be pushed back from this point. He wants to burn this ship, burn the invasion from his shores. Holding on to this ship, Hector calls out for fire to be brought to him. Bring fire, and all with one voice do ye raise the war cry. Now hath Zeus given us the dearest day of all, to take the ships that came hither against the will of the gods, and brought many woes upon us by the cowardice of the elders, who withheld me when I was eager to fight at the sterns of the ships, and kept back the host. But if, even then, far-seeing Zeus did harm our wits, now he himself doth urge and command us onwards. At the same time as Hector was calling out for fire, Aias was backing off some, being overwhelmed by the attacks of the Trojans. He didn't retreat, but he stepped back on that ship deck as far as he could, looking for some protection and fearing for his own imminent death. Aias calls out to the Greeks, "O friends, Danaan heroes, men of Ares' company, play the man, my friends, and be mindful of impetuous valor. Do we deem that there be allies at our backs, or some wall stronger than this to ward off death from men? Verily there is not hard by any city arrayed with towers, whereby we might defend ourselves, having a host that could turn the balance of battle. Nay, but we are set down in the plain of the mailed men of Troy, with our backs against the sea, and far off from our own land. Therefore is safety in battle, and not in slackening from the fight. So spake he, and rushed on, ravening for battle with his keen spear. And whosoever of the Trojans was coming against the ship with blazing fire, at Hector's urging, him would Aias wound, awaiting him with his long spear, and 12 men in front of the ships at close quarters did he wound. While he backed off somewhat, Aias was not abandoning the fight. Instead, he relies on the extreme length of that naval pike and from the relative safety of the ship's decks, and keeps stabbing downwards at any Trojan who dares to obey Hector's summons. Any Trojan who approaches the ships with fire was laid low by the pike of Aias. And that's it. That's the end of Book 15. Wow, we're right back where we were at the end of Book 13, with the Trojans inside the Greek camp. But this time, things will go differently. Homer has brought us to a dramatic peak, a military and emotional point of no return that will leave everything changed. And you'll find out what happens in the next episode, where we'll cover books 16 and 17, two of the most important and heart-wrenching books of the entire Iliad. And also, still, chock full of epic action. Thanks for joining me. This has been Daniel with Your Mythology Book Club. See you next time.